So post-lunch editing Rob popping in even before the credits roll, and that's mainly because of the fact that we talk about a whole bunch of different subjects today, including my feelings towards Grendel, but D slipped in there with a little bit of a patch, so keep in mind that some of the things I say about Grendel in today's video are before this went through, but I figured I would go ahead and share with you exactly what they went ahead and changed and fixed. So Grendel can now cast Nourish while Pulverize is active, to which we've added a new sound, which is definitely nice because that way he can keep himself healed and we get new audio, so that's fantastic. And also we can keep the buffs active while he's in that mode. Grendel Feast Expel deals increased damage based on the number and level of enemies. Good. Nice little scaling addition there. Also deals the same damage as a Radial AoE. I want to check to see exactly what that AoE damage is, or the AoE range is going to look like. Grendel's Regurgitate damage radius increased from 3 up to 3, 4, 5, and 5, and increased damage scaling. So where is the scaling coming from? Like, I need to know, is it the base scaling number, or are we talking about scaling with enemies? Grendel Pulverize no longer ends when he runs out of consumed targets. Instead, it starts draining energy like Ember's Immolation. I like that change because sometimes we want the CC and we're not really worried about having enemies in our tum-tum. Grendel also gets extra acceleration for Pulverize if he uses Nourish during it. Ooh! Okay, so that's a nice little change because sometimes you do get a little bit stuck when it comes to Pulverize. You feel a little bit slow, so when you do consume those enemies, at least you can get extra momentum. Added sound to when Grendel stumbles due to running out of energy, and fixed Grendel having fast legs after using Pulverize. Alright, so that's going to be it for the changes. It does look like something that I want to go ahead and take another close look into it, see if it feels a little bit better, but for the most part, my feelings about Grendel are still going to be the same regardless. Let's go ahead and toss it back to pre-lunch, Rob. Boop! Hey, what's up my chatty little cherchuelos? This is Rob from Guy Plays, and today on The Daily Grind, we're gonna have a nice friendly discussion about update 26. Now, after this baby dropped, I got so many questions like, how do you feel about DE now? Do you think that this is gonna save the game? And is Warframe worth reinstalling? And if I'm gonna be completely honest with you, there was so much released that I actually feel is pretty damn good content, and I wanna jump a little bit deeper into it before I give you any like final conclusions on that specific piece of content. But overall, I'm actually kind of sort of excited. Now, there are certain things that I've like bathed myself in. Like, let me tell you, I've done all my homework on Grendel. I know exactly how I feel about that. I've been playing a lot with Ember, and the whole like Kuva Hunter Lich thing, that's my life now. That's where I'm at. I'm really enjoying that. So there are a lot of things that I want to go ahead and cover, but I figured that today we do a little bit of an overview about a majority of the things that have been launched and giving you my like first-ish impressions, because I've played enough with some of these things to like be able to give you guys my feelings on them. But I also invite you guys to go ahead and toss your input in as well, because maybe you've delved deeper into specific subjects that I haven't necessarily gone so deep on. So today we're going to be taking a look at Vasca Kavats. We're going to be talking about Grendel, the Ember rework, the Vauban rework, and Melee 3.0. Now, as you can see, I have left the whole Kuva Lich chat for a completely separate video because it brings in a lot of conversation about monetization, grind, as well as difficulty, and that's already, you know, a big chunk to cover, and then to kind of like merge that in with Melee 3.0 as well as the rest of this stuff, that's looking at a long episode. We'll save that for a different day. Now, let's go ahead and kick things off with Vasca Kavats. Overall, I think that they are very cute, but kind of pointless, if I'm going to be completely honest with you. One of their abilities is to be able to bypass enemy armor and deal damage and restore some of their health to them, which is cool. And then in addition to that, they have the whole... if you die, they will use 20% of their health when maxed to revive you. And I don't like those kinds of mods. I feel like that's modding for failure. And I would much rather have a kavat that does something to not prevent you from dying, but gives you enough offensive or enough defensive buffs to prevent you from dying. Like, why is dying the thing that we're like modding for? So I'm gonna say no to that. I did have a chat with some people who are saying, well, maybe they're trying to like make a new player-friendly kavat. But I'm like, but you need a kavat to get this kavat. Like, you need to have gotten that whole incubator setup going. Then you must have had another kavat that you needed to go ahead and pick up. Then you need to go ahead and get this kavat because you had to scan like in the derelict and all of that kind of stuff. So why are you going to give us a kavat with like a new player friendly mod on it so late in the string? So me personally, I love the Vasca kavats. And here's the thing that you need to know too. You have to infect your cat twice, because whenever you do an imprint for your kavat, it will remove the Vasca virus from them, which I was about to, and then I realized I would lose that cool red glow that's on my kavat, and I'm like, oh, I don't know if I want to give it up. It's like ephemera on my kavat, which you can put on your kavat now, by the way, specifically the vanquished ones from your lich, but that's a different story. So cute, but kind of pointless. I hope that they get a different precept because that's kind of garbage. Moving on to other garbage. I'm kidding. It's Grendel. I don't think Grendel's garbage. I think that he's a whole lot of fun, but I also don't feel like he is the best out there. Not that every Warframe needs to be the best. I think he's fun, he's different, but he's not necessarily something that's gonna make me go, oh my god, he's fantastic. In fact, coming off of the heels of Goss, I feel like Grendel is a bit of a disappointment. He's a lot more of a simpler frame. You eat up enemies, you keep them in your belly, you get buffs, and you can heal yourself from them. I think the big thing for me is like Regurgitate. Regurgitate doesn't feel like a very strong skill, and I know that it's meant to like manage what's going on inside your belly, to be able to kind of like keep down your energy consumption. But the actual firing of the projectile and the way that the projectile hits enemies, it staggers them, it doesn't knock them down, so there's no CC involved, and the AoE feels very, very small at that same time. So it doesn't feel powerful. It just feels like a tool that needs to be there. In addition, I wish that they had communicated the buffs a little bit better visually. You do get like a audio gurgle. I was gonna call it a Virgle. To kind of like say when you swap between each different buff, but I think that a visual, communicator of that would be a bit better. Now, of course, I understand his 1 and I understand his 4 have to be there because that's the big kind of like thematic thing for him, is that he like gobbles up enemies and then he rolls into a ball. Part of me wishes that kind of like the whole ball thing, when you're in there, you get bonus armor, even more bonus armor from your passive for every enemy that's in your tum-tums. But that's just, something that I personally think could be made a bit better, because you have like, you can hurl yourself at enemies as your defense, but legitimately if you're getting sniped from far away, it still a feels bad moment. So Grendel, whole lot of fun, but kind of, he's not the greatest. Moving on to something that is potentially the greatest. I would like to say that I don't feel like I've felt more excited about a rework than I did when it came to Embers. Like, legitimately, there are a lot of reworks that I've enjoyed in the past, but I don't think that there has been such a big jump when it comes to my excitement levels for a Warframe. Before, Ember wasn't really on my radar. Unlike Saren, who was always kind of sort of on my radar, then she got a rework, then she was like even more on my radar. But now it's kind of like Ember wasn't even a blip on the map, and now I'm like, okay, I feel like running with Ember today. I feel like she's just way more engaging. The fact that her survivability is based on the immolation, I kind of like that because she's got a lot of offensiveness to her. She's got a lot of power when it comes to debuffing and like dealing damage to enemies who are obviously impaired because of that. So there's a lot of offensive prowess there. And there's kind of like, I hate to say it, it's like a push 4 to win, press 4 to win kind of aspect, because you just press 4, then boom, all of a sudden you're like setting enemies ablaze, you're increasing your own power strength. There's a lot of that, but to manage the survivability is a cool aspect to say, all right, you can deal a lot of damage, but you got to use your brain to also keep yourself alive. And I'm like, okay, T, I'm kind of feeling this. I'm kind of really, really excited for Ember right now. Now, I do know that there are pockets of people who are not super duper fond of Ember as she is now. If you want to chime in on that, and please, I do invite you to do it as civilly as you can, however, and let me know, were you an old Ember player? How do you feel moving into the new variation of Ember? What is it that you don't like about it? Or if you absolutely love Ember, which I feel like is the general consensus now, a lot of people are saying, we love Ember, we love the rework. That's where I'm at, but I'm definitely open to try to see it from a different perspective, just so that I can, you know, put out the right criticisms for it in order for it to be improved if it does need to be improved upon. As for the Vauban rework, I've always kind of had a soft spot for Vauban. I've used him a lot in the past, but I always say, and I still feel this way, that Vauban's viability is always dictated by enemy difficulty. So I feel like Vauban is really strong when enemies are really strong and you need to control them. And I don't think that has changed whatsoever. To me, Vauban still feels like Vauban. His one, which is the new Nervos Teslas, I feel like they're a lot more usable, but am I really using them? Not so much. Mine Layer, I don't like a majority of the things that are on Mine Layer. I can see it as kind of like a cool techie gadget thing that people can kind of like play around with, but to me it feels like a lot of play. Like, it doesn't feel like anything that great. The buff coming from one of them though, like the supercharger one, I really do like that one a lot. I'm like, okay, I see the valuability. I think the word was just value and I just kept running with it. But the value in having that in his kit, I really did like that. The orbital strike is very fancy, but at the end of the day, it's a good chunk of damage and it has good synergy with collapsing his 4. But at the end of the day, usually I run around with Vauban and I just Bastille up what I need to Bastille up. And then occasionally I'll toss down an orbital strike for shits and giggles. But also I might just slide on in with some melee attacks or some explosive weapons. So to me, I don't really feel like the gameplay has changed that much, but I do feel like his quality of life has been increased. So if you're an avid Vauban player, let me know how you feel about him down in the comments below as well. The only thing that I would say criticism-wise is, again, Mine Layer still feels a little bit meh, aside from the power buff. And the animations, because I know they're trimming some of the animations already, but I do feel like the animation on Bastille could also be knocked down just a little bit. Now, when it comes to the augments for both of these, Ember, again, absolutely fantastic. Vauban, I always felt like his augments were kind of weird, and they're still kind of weird now. If anybody wants to chime in on how they feel about that, put that down below. Me personally, I've never been a fan of them. The only one that I think might be cool is the repeater for the photon strike, but I find that a lot of the things that I've been using, like I was saying earlier, when Vauban is really strong, when enemies are very difficult and they just don't die straight out of the gate. A lot of the enemies that I've been fighting with Vauban lately are like on interceptions and they're not super duper tough. So I don't really see the value of the photon repeater, mainly because of the fact that I haven't been using it that much. Anyway, moving along to the big chunk of stuff we need to cover, which is Melee 3.0. Ooh, this one I have not dived as deep into as I feel like I want to before I put out any final feelings on there. But I have been kind of like checking around in certain places to get some more information from, because I've looked in my comment section and there are a lot of like conflicting feelings. Like, legit, it even comes down to the specificity of, oh my god, Gunblades feel so good now, and then somebody else saying the Redeemer is completely unusable. And I'm like, y'all gotta make up your minds! But from my general feeling, I feel like the front end feels more powerful, but the scaling doesn't feel quite as powerful as it used to. And that kind of all goes hand in hand with some things that we've seen with condition overload. The next thing that I want to kind of touch on is the combos. They feel a lot less weighty. Like, they don't feel as impactful, but they feel a ton smoother. I also feel like there's a lot of people out there that are feeling a tad bit discombobulated when learning the new combo system, and I highly suggest that you guys kind of stick through it, learn the new flow before you judge anything. Like I said, I'm actually going to be doing like a little mini series where I'm going to do a melee weapon edit, where I'm going to pick specific weapon types, and I'm going to go through, find the combos that I feel work the best for my playstyle, and then you guys can chime in on how you feel about them as well. Then we have heavy attacks, which I just listed here as who cares? So let's go ahead and jump back to the initial topic where we're talking about scaling doesn't feel as powerful. And I have to say that it kind of boils down to one mod that has changed a lot. Well, I can't say changed a lot, but it has been appropriately balanced. What it boils down to is condition overload got the chroma treatment. They got chroma'd, and I like the fact that that is now a new term that we have. So for those of you guys who don't know what being chroma'd is, it's when you have a specific thing that feels super duper overpowered, but it's only overpowered because DE accidentally implemented the wrong calculations for it, and it's way stronger than it should be. And then when DE goes back and fixes the calculation to work like how they intended it to work initially, then it's like, well, that's how it's intended to work, but it's also like, but that's a nerf. Now, you guys know how I feel about these kind of things when it comes to nerfing things or chromaing things. I totally get where they're coming from, where certain things just feel way too freaking overpowered. And I know that a lot of us saw it, and a lot of us took advantage of it, and a lot of us relished those moments. And I have nothing, I don't think that there's anything wrong with having a nice little overpowered little, you know, bits and pieces here. Just as long as we have enemies to use them on, you know, I'm like, a little overpowered is nice. But at the same time, for anybody who's been a long-term player of the game, y'all knew this was gonna happen, right? It was gonna get rolled back. It was gonna get chroma'd. And I understand that balance needs to be, you know, as all things should be, it's balanced. So I get where they're coming from when it comes down to that. But what I think is the more interesting thing of all of this is actually the conversations that are happening around this. And this is kind of why I put that whole let's have a friendly discussion at the very beginning of this video, because there are some people that are in the prime pressure point camp and keep it. I don't know why you wouldn't keep it. And there are people on the condition overload camp who are like, you don't need prime pressure points. But what I really love is the discussion that's happening. All right, so a lot of people who love Prime Pressure Point, or who feel like it's, you know, still a viable mod, is very much on the, well, listen, if you've got all this front-ended damage, it's still like a higher damage bonus than Condition Overload. You need to apply 2 statuses to an enemy to get, you know, a higher bonus than Prime Pressure Point grants straight out of the gate. And if you have that, you know, base damage buff already, enemies are just going to end up dying. And I think that's totally valid. Front end damage, kill the enemy outright, don't have to wait for statuses to kick in order for something to become viable. But there are some other people that are saying, well, listen, those enemies that would have died to Prime Pressure Point's damage boost anyway would have already been dead. They're weak enemies, and this is where I start like kind of going, oh, that's a good point. Where they say, if, what do you call this? Why would you mod to go against weak things? You really want a mod setup that sets you up for success against strong things. And I completely get where they're coming from, but of course you do have to prime your enemies. So I see some conversation and going, well, I prime them with my weapon first and then I come in with melee. And I'm like, I just can't see myself running around with a gun going to put all these statuses and like, now I can go melee them. So that's where I kind of lean back into Prime Pressure Point. But the other thing that like goes on in my head too is I'm like, well, if we're not going to use Prime Pressure Point, that opens up another mod slot. And I'm like, we could use that mod slot for something along the lines of like maybe another critical damage booster. So what's the threshold of critical multiplier at its base that would outperform a Prime Pressure Point, right? So now we're doing a lot of talking and we're having like these intellectual conversations. Well, some of us are having intellectual conversations. Other people are just shouting. And so I'm kind of watching, like, you know, this battle go down, and I'm just like, that's a good point. That's a good point. That's a good point. And I'm like, we haven't had a conversation, an intelligent conversation about modding in such a long time. In fact, if you've seen a lot of my builds, it's basically a hybrid build with either viral or corrosive. It's part crit, part status, boom. That's the end of the day, right? But now there's a lot of talk about saying, okay, well, in this circumstance with this weapon, you would end up wanting to use, you know, this set of mods more. And I'm like, I like the fact that we might actually have to think about our builds again, or maybe even have multiple builds, like a front end build for the standard star chart, and then like a specialized build for scaling into more difficult content. So part of me is like, okay. And then, you know, we always get into all of the discussions about like Blood Rush and like Weeping Wounds and all of that kind of stuff. And I'm like, it's interesting. I'm kind of liking it. So for me right now, I'm still sorting out my feelings on it. But if you guys have any feelings about that, leave that in the comments below. But do me a favor. Don't be like some of the other, you know, Warframe YouTube communities where they just want to yell at people. Like, let's talk about the intellectual part of this. So all in all, I think that it's fascinating and I like the discussions. Now, moving on to, I mean, the melee combos, there's really not much more to say there. I just say learn them and get the vibe from them. We'll go into, you know, the edits, and I'll decide how I feel about them myself, and you guys will be able to chime in on a case-by-case basis, because I feel like there's not a lot to learn, but there's a lot to like reacquaint yourself with. Like when it came to specific combos, I was like, oh my god, where's this combo for hammers? We used to have that combo, where did it go? And so it's all about kind of experimenting and finding out where they went and learning what DE is trying to kind of like implement with it. There are still a couple animations where I feel like they could be trimmed a little bit at the very, very end that feel a little bit jarring. Now moving on to heavy attacks and the lifted status. First and foremost, I would like to say, who the fuck cares? Now, I do understand that there are some people out there that really do like heavy attacks because they deal like a nice chunk of damage. And me personally, I'm like, I mean, do I care that? Do I want to burn all of my combo counter? Especially if I have like this amazing, you know, red crit flurry that's going along and I'm applying all of these slash procs. Do I really care about that heavy attack? And is that heavy attack worth losing all of that? And in general, the answer is no. Yes, you can build up your combo counter a lot faster. You build it up a lot faster. But for one attack, I don't really know. In addition to that, the lifted status to me is a little bit of a joke. Like, this is our juggling. I'm like, is it really juggling though? Because it's not really. It's just like a weird form of CC. And a part of me is like, I don't know if I love it. However, they are counting that as another status effect, just in case for you condition overload people out there. It is another status, so that's a great little bonus that you get there. But what I'm thinking for heavy attacks is you really gotta make it worth our while when we use a heavy attack. Now, I've basically pinpointed what I feel is wrong. I don't want to burn all of these stacks on one single attack on like maybe like a small cluster of enemies, right? Even like the you know, the heavy attack from the sky, you get the like lifted effect, and it's okay, but it's not that great. So what I want to propose, and maybe we'll do this when we go into the edit and we'll talk more about it, but is these heavy attacks to have cooler effects on them, to like make them much bigger attacks, like bring in, what is that one samurai game where you fight like hordes of enemies? Whatever that's called, where you're like whipping enemies up into the air and then slashing them and doing all these crazy moves. Implement one of those for each different weapon type. And I was putting something down like, okay, like fans, like you could have a fan move which basically vortexes enemies into you, and then like you do a spin and you do an AoE slash in the air and apply slash procs to all of those surrounding enemies. And the combo counter amount would matter because it would dictate the range and the damage that you would do with that slash. Tell me that's not kind of cool, right? Or maybe with hammers, you could just smash the ground, and of course the range and the duration of this ability would be affected by your combo counter, but those enemies would remain prone for a duration. So that way you could go ahead and do ground finishers and just start hammering nails. So part of me is like, okay, that is something that I would use. I would definitely fling myself into a group of enemies and just do a ground smash Reinhardt style, right? That would feel dope and make the heavy attacks feel more meaningful, as opposed to, oh, I hit like 2 enemies, you know, one got follow through damage, yada yada yada, whatever, you know? So for me, I thought that would be a thing. And even when it comes to different types of weapons, I feel like this would be a great way to like differentiate each type of weapon. Like daggers, maybe their heavy attack wouldn't be a heavy attack. Maybe it would be like built-in covert lethality. Like legit, with one of the dagger attacks, you could just go up to an enemy and just fucking slash him. Maybe you don't even kill him outright. Maybe you just go ahead and deal 90% of their damage to them and then leave them with a slash proc. Like, that would be dope, and that would only consume one charge of your combo counter. So that would be a really, really cool way to be able to kind of like, you know what I mean, add in like more flavor when it comes to each of these individual weapon types, right? And even some weapon types that maybe aren't the most desirable, maybe you could attach these heavy attacks with really, really desirable types of heavy attacks. So that way you could say, all right, well, the weapon in general is just okay, but the heavy attack on it is absolutely crazy, so I absolutely need to use this one, right? Maybe even a cool way to kind of like implement in some of the sparring weapons and give them really, really cool heavy attacks. Regardless, those are my current feelings on where Warframe is with this update, all of the things that I've chatted about already. Let me know how you feel down in the comments below. Also, if there's anything that you feel to the contrary with for what I've stated, please let me know. I'm like open. I want to like really kind of figure out where other people are coming from and try to see it from their perspective and kind of be able to advocate where advocation is needed. Does that make sense? Not avocadoing. We don't avocado here, but we can advocate if there is something that does need to change. So toss all of your feelings down in the comments below. Be as friendly as you can and make sure that it's digestible so that there's not a lot of yelling and screaming that makes me want to block or delete your comment. I'm just saying, like, digestible, you know? So that about does it for me for now. And as always, love somebody, hurt nobody, and touch your body. And don't worry, we will be covering the liches soon enough. I just really want to get my feelings in about that monetization stuff. Anyway, I'll see you guys next time. Bye-bye!